Thanks for joining us this morning on this beautiful sunny day. I'm Councillor Fiona McAllister, Mayor of Yarra Ranges Council, and I'm joined to start this session by with Councillor Catherine Burnett-Wake. Just like to start by acknowledging I'm very proud to have been born on the land of the Ngāi Tahu in Aotearoa. Very grateful to live on the beautiful lands of the Wurundjeri people in the Yarra Valley, and pay my deepest respects to elders past, present and emerging. As you all know, the storm that swept through Yarra Ranges on the 9th of June was something we had never experienced or seen before. We've since discovered we were at the epicentre of that devastating storm, and the impacts were the type of impact we'd never seen before across Yarra Ranges. And of course, as you all know, it came under the constant veil of the pandemic that we're still in, but where resilience and resilience was low and fatigue was high already. So whilst there's many things that council are doing, certainly one of the critical pieces is supporting community, those directly impacted, like those that are joining us today, and their friends and families, where well-being and responding on an emotional level to the impact of the storms is a really critical part of recovery. So that's why we're here today. And today's session will be followed by other smaller sessions in the coming months to offer support on an emotional well-being level for community. So today's session is a webinar, and I would assure you that whilst I'd love to see and hear you all, we can't. It'll be recorded, and that's so we can share the session with others who might like to watch it or be part of it in the future. But there will be no information about you, and certainly your participation through the Q&A, posting your questions, but no visual or audio of you will be shared with anybody. There's certainly opportunities throughout this as David starts to present and talk with us for you to ask questions. And so certainly at the bottom of the screen, there's a Q&A button. Please jump on at any time and feel free to post questions, and Councillor Burnett-Wake will share those questions with David as we go through today's session. Today is really an opportunity for David to share his wisdom, answer your questions, share his insights. And as I said, we'll certainly be following up with other smaller, hopefully in-person sessions in the coming months. So I'll hand over to Catherine to perhaps introduce David and get us started today. Thank you all for joining us.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Catherine Burnett-Wake, and I am the councillor for the Streeton ward. I must apologise to begin with. There is some chainsawing happening in the background, which I'm sure many of you watching is probably a very common occurrence on a Saturday morning. So yes, that's what's happening around here. So it's my great pleasure to introduce David Younger to this webinar today. David is a clinical psychologist and an expert in the area of natural disasters and emergencies. And he has worked with many communities, not just in Victoria, but right across Australia, who have been impacted by various emergencies, including severe weather events and bushfires. We are very happy to bring him here today for you all so he can share his wisdom and insight and, support us through this, really challenging time, compounded even further because of the COVID restrictions and the pandemic that we're experiencing. The session that David will be presenting is in two parts. The first part of the session is in regards to common effects of severe weather events. And once he finishes that first part of the session, there'll be a Q&A specifically around that. Then we'll move to the second part of the session where David will discuss reactions and responses right across the age groups that we, present when faced with a disaster. Following that, he'll be setting out some management strategies as well and set that in the context of emotional well-being, and also outlining more formal support and where you can access that. So enough from me. I'm really excited to hear from you, David, and hear and listen to your wisdom. So thank you very much for coming along today.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks for the introduction, and thank you everyone that is out there that has joined this session this morning. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people, traditional custodians of the land on which I gather today, and to pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today also. It's been a very challenging 18 months, and the storm on the 19th of June, of course, brought with it significant additional challenges. This session today, my aim is certainly not to just talk at you. What I really am aiming to do here is to share with you information that we've come to learn, understand and recognise applies to people after significant weather events, and which what I'd encourage you to do is to try to pick up on or pick up from this session and carry with you after this session 3 or 4, maybe 5 key points that you can apply to your life or to your family or to loved ones around you. And the aim here really is to assist in helping you to manage and improve your health and well-being overall. Something I just want to touch on very briefly before I do start to talk about 5 key main effects of experiencing a significant weather event are that as we work our way through this session, and because the severe weather event was significantly stressful, if not quite frightening for many people, it is possible that as you're sitting there in your home listening to what I'm talking about, you might start to experience some reactions. Those reactions could include increased heart rate or changes in breathing or temperature changes. Now, I don't want you to be overly concerned if that occurs. That's part of the body's normal reaction. But what I want to mention to you is that something you can do to manage that reaction is to regulate your breathing. For example, just taking some calm, deep breaths in and out through the nose. Or alternatively, you could press your feet down onto the floor or just feel the chair underneath the body in which you're sitting. That should help to ground you in the moment. We do also have as a part of this presentation a slide which will come up in a moment outlining 3 services that you could contact if you felt there was a need. Bushfire Recovery Victoria, which has an information service and telephone line that you can contact either today or tomorrow, that's open until 1 p.m. We also have the contact numbers there for Beyond Blue and Lifeline, both of which are 24-hour, 7-day-a-week telephone support services that you can contact free of charge. So I'd like to share with you 5 key effects of experiencing a severe weather event or a natural disaster. And they are stress, disruption to normal daily life, reactions and responses, loss and recovery. And I'm just going to touch on each of these for a few minutes. But what I want to mention at the outset is that many of the principles contained within each of these effects are applicable to not only the storm, but also to COVID, which is this significant additional layer that all community members are experiencing at the moment. So what do I mean when I mention stress? Because we hear that term used very commonly in day-to-day life. Everybody experiences stress. Well, really what I'm talking about here are in particular 2 main types of stress. Now, I'll touch on those in a moment. So there is normal everyday stress. But then there are high levels of stress than that. The highest state of stress that we can experience as humans or as people is survival mode. And survival mode is a state of functioning that we go into when we're faced with a significantly challenging, probably very frightening, if not life-threatening event. The second state of stress is endurance mode. I'll touch on that shortly. So from the community members that I've spoken with in regard to the 9th of June storm, that was at a minimum a stressful event, but for many people it was frightening. And because it was frightening, this inbuilt survival alarm system was activated for many people. And when this survival alarm system is activated, a whole series of changes take place in the body, well, actually in our thinking and in our emotional state and physically. Things such as a significantly increased rate of heart rate, breathing, the sorts of thoughts that we experience going through our mind. We also tend to become very, very focused in the moment, locked onto what is occurring in our immediate surrounds. When we're in this state of functioning, we're not thinking about what happened yesterday or what might happen tomorrow or what our plans are for a week or two down the track. We are literally very, very grounded in the moment. And we're in a very sensitive and sort of hyper-tuned in state to what's occurring, to the storm experience. And so everything becomes accentuated. Noises, for example, and other sensory experiences and sensations that people have. And often these sensations are stored in the memory. I'll come to touch on that shortly. But what I want to mention and let you know is that survival mode is actually a normal state of functioning. It is actually the mind and the body doing what they're supposed to do. They're adapting to facing or coming into contact with a significant threat. And they do that in order to help us increase the chance of getting through, doing what needs to be done in that moment. Now, usually when things go according to plan, and when that immediate threat passes or when the storm subsides, this survival state of functioning, this alarm as I've referred to it as well, gradually starts to turn off. And again, when things go according to plan, the human body returns to a healthy state of functioning. That's what should happen and does happen a lot of the time for many people. However, I've also heard that there are a number of community members out there in storm-affected areas for whom their alarm system has either stayed turned on or continues to turn on intermittently when triggered by different experiences, for example, strong winds again. So I'll talk in the second part of this presentation about ways to manage reactions and responses. A second key effect is disruption. And when I use this word disruption, what I'm referring to is that normal daily life is relatively stable and predictable, and we might not give a lot of thought to it, but normal daily life is made up of routines. That is, we follow a whole series of routines that we don't think about that help give life a real sense of stability and predictability. And we can sort of just work through from the beginning of the day to the end of the day without necessarily giving a lot of thought to all of the different tasks that we're going to be involved in. Some of them do require attention, others not so much. You know, there's a significant portion of our normal day-to-day lives which we're able to sort of work our way through by going into this sort of automatic pilot kind of functioning. Now, what we know severe weather events do is they generally cause a significant amount of disruption to daily life. And that's influenced by a whole number of things, but it's certainly influenced by the material or the physical impact. So, for example, damage to your home or damage to the school, or as was the case in this particular storm event, loss of power, which was significantly disruptive, and loss of communication. And we know that those disruptions were prolonged. Now, disruption has the effect of increasing stress levels. There's that word again. And it also brings about an ongoing state of uncertainty until the disruption comes to an end. The issue with severe weather events is that disruption can actually go for a long time. If your home or your property is significantly impacted or a part of your house is destroyed, the disruption might go for many months. And then there's the overlap here with COVID. And of course, with us now having moved our way into another lockdown, the lockdowns cause significant disruption as well. So there are these two levels or layers. Now, I mentioned that there was a second type of stress that's important to give attention to, and that is endurance mode. And I'm introducing it here amidst disruption because most people don't stay in that highest state of stress, survival mode, ongoing for many, many months. They might stay in that high state of stress for a few weeks or maybe a month, possibly a little bit longer. But then usually that alarm does turn itself off, or it doesn't stay on constantly. It might turn on intermittently, but for the most part, it will turn itself down. The second state of stress is endurance. It's not as high as the alarm stage, but it is a higher state of stress. And we call it endurance because it really involves people running a bit of a marathon as opposed to running a 100-meter sprint, which is survival mode. Now, we can go into an endurance state of stress just through normal everyday life if we start to face significant challenges. So in a pre-storm, pre-pandemic world, having a child going through year 12, selling your house and having a relationship challenge would probably be enough to push us up into an endurance state of stress. That means that we're facing significant challenges. We need to draw on more internal resources and energy than normal. And we do that without realizing that we're doing it, but we do it to rise to the challenge and to get through things, to just keep going. But the issue with the endurance state of stress and running a marathon is that you're supposed to eventually stop. You're supposed to rest and recover and let your body find its healthy balance again. But we do also know and understand that unfortunately for some people after a severe weather event, and because of the way in which a high state of stress affects people, they don't necessarily stop. They keep going. The disruption takes over life, and so much in day-to-day life becomes about trying to overcome challenges and difficulties, and sometimes trying to get things back to normal, or a lot of the time trying to get things back to normal. And that often prevents people maintaining a healthy state, actually taking their foot off the accelerator and resting and recovering, which is so important. There is a third state of stress, which I will just drop in briefly, and that is exhaustion. It's reaching the point further down the track, often many, many months, after a year has passed, for example, where people run out of energy. And I'll mention this analogy to you. It's the analogy or the description of a car that has two fuel tanks. You know, the sort of car that has the LPG main tank and then the petrol backup? Well, going through something like a severe weather event where your alarm turns on and then you go into endurance mode, it's kind of, when you stay in endurance mode for quite some time, it's kind of like you end up using up the petrol in your main tank. And then if you still haven't gotten through everything, if there are still other things to work through, you'll start using up the energy in your reserve tank, that backup petrol. And where we don't want people to get to is to reach a point, just turning up the volume, is to get to a point where their energy reserves have run too low and they've run out of them. So it's stress, disruption, and these two states of stress. What I'll then touch on is reactions and responses, loss and recovery, and then we'll come to some questions. So I guess already I've started to mention some reactions and responses, but key reactions and responses at the moment that people could still be experiencing are feeling quite on edge, worried about another storm, and often when these reactions and responses come about, it's when there's been some sort of trigger. And so a typical trigger at this point in time would be strong winds, or hearing the sound of wind blowing through leaves or branches, or as may be occurring out there, hearing trees drop, for example, if they've been damaged, or other sounds that are associated with the storm experience, although not just sounds, other sensations too. And really, in essence, what's occurring here is that when there's a trigger, the body's internal alarm system, that survival mode, thinks that there's some sort of danger, some sort of risk, and it activates. And what it's trying to do is to prepare us again for some sort of risky situation. But something very important to realize here is that not every time we experience a reaction or a response, or not every time we're triggered, actually represents a dangerous, threatening situation again. Not every windy day represents a storm, just like not every hot day represents a high bushfire risk day, if I use that example. And so what becomes important over time is to learn how to manage the body's responses and reactions, to learn some techniques that will help you turn the volume down on it if it is activated, but also help you learn how to not have it turn on in the first place, ideally. So we generally learn to do things on an emotional and a physical level. That is, we learn strategies that help on those different levels. But positive self-talk also becomes very important. I want to touch on loss and recovery. These are the two final effects of the three. When I'm talking about loss, what I'm referring to here is that there are all sorts of different types of loss that can occur for people, not just one main type of loss. You see, the common type of loss that people assume, or that the main type of loss that people equate to as representing significant loss is material loss. For example, damage to a house, damage to fences, damage to a car, or to some other aspect of a property. But in fact, there are many different types of loss. Loss is actually an emotional response to a disconnection with things that we have some sort of important connection with. Material things, that absolutely occurs too, but what about the loss associated with a beautiful landscape, or the loss associated with lovely trees and a lovely view? Or the loss that might be associated with part of a school being damaged, or a school being closed for a while, or neighbours moving out of an area. I just bring this up because one of the things that we notice and see can be challenging and difficult for people sometimes, is falling into the assumption that there is only one type of loss, and then sometimes making judgments about another person's experience of loss, a neighbour or a community member. But the comment we tend to make is that we don't really know what sort of loss a person has experienced until we talk to them about it, and until we get a sort of an insight into what their experience is. The other reason I bring up loss is that it's really important to give yourself time, to work through an experience of processing and digesting the way in which things change, the way in which things change in your life, but the way in which things can change internally and emotionally for you as well. And all of this takes a bit of time to get used to. The last main effect that I want to touch on with you, so we've spoken about, or I've spoken about, stress, and in fact two types of stress: alarm and survival mode, and then the endurance state of stress. I've touched on the disruption that can occur to normal daily life as a result of going through something like a severe weather event. I've touched a little bit on reactions and responses in the body, and then also on the fact that there are various types of loss that occur for people, not just the material state of loss. Fifthly then is recovery. And this is a word that we tend to hear being used quite a lot after severe weather events and after storms. It's a word that's used by organisations, agencies, by councils, by the media, and those of you in the community will start to use it yourselves as well. But what I want to mention to you is that there is not just one type of recovery either. And what we notice also happens for community and for people is that there's a tendency to think that recovery, or successful recovery, involves getting life back to exactly the way it was before the severe weather event or before the natural disaster event. Sometimes that's possible, but sometimes it isn't possible actually. Sometimes life is always going to be just a little bit different. And so a typical example would relate to a house or a home which is damaged and needs to be repaired. Well, in some way that house is always going to be a little bit different. Or a house that's completely destroyed and a new one needs to be built. It will take time for that new house to become a home, but it will always be different to the old one. Or if we talk about the natural landscape and changes to that, you know, it may come back differently. It won't be exactly the same. Now, there's an important link here with stress. And one of the key characteristics of stress, and then also remember that word disruption, is that stress causes us to become very focused on the tasks at hand. It causes us to lock onto the challenges, the difficulties, and often the problems. And when we're full of stress, and when we are, in quite understandably working to overcome difficulties, we get locked onto achieving things. And something that people can get locked onto is achieving a complete recovery, getting everything back to the way it once was before. Now, this makes complete sense, and this is actually the natural human tendency, but remember also that we've only got a certain amount of energy in the body, and we need to learn how to conserve that energy for the length of time that we're going to need it. We also need to learn how to replenish those energy reserves. Now, how does this sort of all fit into recovery? Well, what I want to suggest to you is that recovery, and in fact successful recovery, is much more of a process than it is an outcome. It's much more of a journey than it is of reaching some predetermined point that we've built up in our mind, where we might think that once I reach that particular point in the future, I'll be recovered. I can then rest. But I can tell you, I've seen too many people over the years adopt that view, and then they reach that point that they figured out for themselves, and that actually only ends up becoming the first time that they ever stop. The first time they ever stop to rest and recover. And that might be 6 months down the track, or that might be a year down the track, or a little bit further down the track. So what I'd like you to do is to think about finding a speed and a pace for your own personal recovery journey that is right for you, that's sustainable, that's manageable, and that allows you to make adjustments over a period of time so that you can actually keep up healthy, positive involvements in your life. There's little point burning yourself out trying to get to some end point if on the way through very important life priorities suffer. For example, relationships, or spending time with your children, and still having a laugh, or sitting around the dinner table and talking and enjoying each other's company. These are the sorts of things that can fall by the wayside when the disruption takes over and when stress levels become too high. Now, these are the 5 key effects. We'll move to Q&A. I just want to also mention to you, though, that there is also another side to all of these challenges, and that is that people can find out about new aspects of life that are quite positive, that they weren't previously aware of. But I'll just pause there for a moment, and I think we'll move over to Q&A.
Thanks so much, David. That was so insightful. I'm sure that everybody listening in, is finding this really beneficial. So I just want to remind all the participants that, please do put your questions in the Q&A chat box, and then I can ask David your question. So to kick it off, I have a question for you. David, you mentioned that one of the common effects of the storm is likely to be disruption to people's lives, and this can cause a lot of stress. Do you have some suggestions about how it might be possible to manage the disruption?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, a really good question, and I think so relevant at the moment with the overlay of COVID and of lockdown, of course, and restrictions, which bring about additional disruption to our lives. So really the first thing is to recognize that disruption is occurring in your life. That's step 1. Step 2 is making the very deliberate decision to not let it take over. That can happen all too easily. And one of the ways to not let it take over is to do a sort of a healthcare and assessment well-being check-in with yourself, and to see what your stress levels are actually like. Because if they're high, they need to come down. Look, it's also really important, in answer to this question, to keep a focus on your important life priorities. I touched on some before: talking to children, sitting down, having your dinner, spending time with your partner, short walks, etc. These are all the important life priorities that help nourish our lives, that help keep us healthy, help us maintain balance. And then the third, or maybe it's the fourth part, I think, to this answer is to return to routines where possible, or to keep routines in your life. Now, our routines have also been disrupted and restricted, But even when you're living within the lockdown restrictions, you can still live a relatively routinized life. And that's important. Routines help stabilize disruption, which actually help reduce stress levels. These are very important points.
Thank you so much for that answer, David. It was interesting. My youngest son, who is 10, he woke up this morning and he's like, "Mum, what am I going to do today? I don't know what to do with myself." And he's like, "I don't think I like the weekends because during the week, everything is really structured and routine." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, yeah, buddy, I'm going to have to sort out a really strict kind of structured weekend routine to help him, get through." But obviously this isn't necessarily storm related, but it's kind of a similar process, I would assume.
Yeah, and look, maybe with children, I think, and I'll touch on children in part 2, but I think in that instance or that example where there is so much structure during the day due to the home-based learning, what we can certainly afford to do is take a bit of pressure or focus off the structure over the weekend. You can still have routine, as in there's a set time that you get up and you have meals and snacks at set time and TV time at a certain time for a certain period, etc., and bedtime. But probably for children, a lot more play in between those periods of time, where possible, just to allow them to decompress a bit from the challenges of learning and homeschooling.
There's a question about loss, David. Is there some sort of process that people go through when they experience loss, and what can be done to help?
Yeah. So loss is an emotional process. I think I mentioned earlier on that the emotional process is due to the connection or the attachment that we have to things and people or landscapes that we cherish or that we enjoy or that we love. And so essentially when we're experiencing loss, we're experiencing an emotional response to that. So there is definitely a process that we go through. What I want to convey is that it's normal to go through that process. It's really important that people come to recognize and realize that if they're experiencing a range of different emotions, many of these will actually just be normal human responses to the particular event that's taken place. They don't necessarily in and of themselves mean that you're experiencing a formal mental health difficulty, another term that we hear a lot. It might just mean that I'm experiencing a normal reaction to the challenges and the difficulties in my life. So, if someone's feeling very upset and emotional about changes to the lovely landscape, for example, acknowledge that. Don't block it. Don't push it out of your mind and try not to go there. But do talk about it to others, or write about it in a journal. Draw on supports if needed, and then just allow yourself time, permit yourself time to make the necessary adjustments, because it's a process and not just reaching some outcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much for that. There's a question in regards to recovery. You said that recovery is more of a process and a journey than it is reaching a particular endpoint. What can our community members do to support their own recovery?
Yeah, so I think, and I might have mentioned this phrase as well, or this suggestion, but find a speed and a pace for recovery that is sustainable. That's the number one important thing. I think the recovery from the storm and recovery from the pandemic is probably going to be relatively, long-term, medium-term, the rest of this year, maybe into next year as well. And again, people who are able to, there's two things here, people who are able to, we've learned, undertake the best recovery or have the healthiest recovery are the people who are able to sustain their health and well-being for the duration that goes for, which is varying periods of time for different people. But recovery is also better for those people who are able to still have enjoyable, meaningful, pleasurable experiences on the way through. Stay connected with people, talk with friends, have a laugh now and again, rather than all of the challenges and often the difficulties associated with a big life event taking over. There was one other comment I wanted to make, and I guess this is probably a little bit in the context of the new normal, which we'll touch on in the second half. But I think it's about not fighting the recovery journey as well. You know, for some people, I've certainly come to understand, and it makes complete sense to me, that there's just a want to not even have to go through it. You know, why do I have to go through it? I wish it hadn't happened. I just want things to be back the way they were, you know, when life was easier and simpler. But the problem is that we can't wind the clock back. You know, we can't teleport ourselves back in time. And so really the best thing that we can do is adjust to the way life is. But I say that cautiously and kindly, because adjustment is harder or easier for different people. But it's something that you can work your way through gradually with the support and help of others.
Thanks so much, David. Such great insight and advice. I just check if there's any more questions. I have another question. How can I better manage triggers that sneak up on me, causing increased heart rate, rapid breathing? For example, from seeing a house or an area I haven't seen since the storm. Yeah. Great question.
Yeah, excellent question. Thanks so much for asking that question. So in essence, this is really all two things here. One, it's important to acknowledge and expect that some people will experience reactions like this. Two, we need to realise that this is activation of that survival alarm system that I mentioned. We're triggered and the body responds by exposure to what the brain thinks is another threatening event, another potentially threatening event. So this is so much about managing the stress response, and one of the very effective, I guess, stress management techniques 101 is calm, deep breathing, regulated breathing. Now, the technique that I mentioned to people is breathing in and out through the nose for 3 seconds in and 3 seconds out. That's a 6-second cycle for 10 cycles, which is 1 minute. And then on the last breath out, to breathe out for 3, 4, 5, 6 seconds, and then to go back to the 3 in, 3 out. Now, the reason we do this is that this controls the amount of air and oxygen that goes into the lungs and the amount of oxygen that goes into the bloodstream. Typically, when people become stressed and anxious, they take lots of short, shallow breaths. That brings more oxygen into the lungs and into the blood, which actually adds to the anxiety response. So we're regulating the anxiety response through calm breathing. The other thing is grounding. Grounding involves coming into contact with your surrounds. So if you're in a car, and as I mentioned at the start of this session, or suggested, this could be really feeling with and connecting the seat underneath your body. You might clench your fist so that you can feel your skin. You might touch a piece of clothing that you're wearing. And a third aspect is reassuring self-talk. I'll be okay. This is to be expected. This is challenging, but I can work my way through it. Just calm breathing, calm, relax, stay with it.
Thanks so much. On the grounding, I find it really interesting. I know if I'm feeling particularly stressed or triggered, I go into the garden and do gardening and put my hands in the earth, and it's amazing how much better I feel after doing that. I think that's all the Q&A that we've got for this first component. So I will get off screen and hand over so you can get into the second part. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so thanks again, everyone, for staying with this session. So I just spoke there, of course, about 5 main effects, and we worked through a few questions and answers there. Having a little bit of an awareness and an understanding, I guess, of the types of community members living through the Yarra Ranges. I'm involved also in some work with the Department of Education, and so have been working with schools in some of the storm-affected areas. I wanted to cover information that's relevant for adults, children, and teenagers. You know, I thought that if I just talk about adults, then I'll really be missing out on leaving out 2 very important groups, because there will be some, if not many, parents out there, and some, if not many, families out there tuned into this session. So I'm just going to work my way through adults, children and teenagers or youth, and then I'll sort of finish off with a list of general strategies. So why even start? I'm going to start with adults, and the question might be, why even start with adults in the first place? Well, there's two main reasons. One, adults themselves have a right to feel healthy and to manage their own well-being following a significant weather event in a storm. So it's important for adults as individuals to recover after an event like that. But secondly, for adults who are carers or parents, and or part of a family, really they're the foundation or the stable base for children and teenagers. And so it's very important for adults to become aware of their own state so that they can influence and provide a stable foundation and basis for young people that might be in their lives. I want to mention timeframes here, which is that 9th of June is at least a couple of months ago now. What we would be hoping is that for the majority of people, their reactions and responses have started to settle and have really started to settle. When I say settling, I mean that the intensity and the frequency and how long they occur for should really have decreased by now. Also, the level of impact and effect on day-to-day life, for example, my ability to work or my ability to function in or have good, healthy relationships or conversations in a relationship with friends and family would be a good example. By this, I mean that if those areas of your life are still being significantly affected, for instance, I can't hold my concentration for very long, or I keep forgetting what I'm saying halfway through a sentence, or I read something for work on the computer and then halfway through a paragraph I forget what I've read and I therefore need to go back to the start, then now actually is a really important time to check in with yourself and figure out whether you need to adopt some informal strategies and supports, or maybe now might be a time to check in with a health professional like a doctor or a GP, because these sorts of reactions, if they're continuing 2 or 3 months down the track and they are strong and intense, they generally don't tend to go away on their own. I mean, they can settle down over time, but generally we can get good improvement very quickly with some formal assistance and support. So it's a key point here I'm mentioning about time frame and sort of recognizing the type of reactions you're having at the moment and how strong they are. And all of this provides an important foundation for children, teenagers, and families. In terms of reactions for adults and for individuals, we can also, there's a slightly different way to look at this, which is to think about reactions and I'm having that intrude into my day-to-day life. So by that I mean, I just find myself doing something ordinary out in the garden, and then I start thinking about the storm. In fact, I start seeing pictures in my mind of what occurred on the day or on the night, or I might start hearing sounds. A second way we can look at it is avoidance. I do things very deliberately to try to avoid being reminded of the storm. I don't watch television. I turn the news off if it comes on. I might get something in the mail or an email about the storm and I quickly delete it or put it in a folder so I don't have to look at it, because if I do, it gives me that stressed, anxious response. My alarm stage turns on again. And then the third aspect is my emotions change, fluctuate quite rapidly. This is another way to look at reactions and I guess to self-assess, just in a general way, how strong and intense they still are at the moment. And I'd suggest if they are up there, then again, now is a really good time to be looking at some of the support services that are out there. I'm a really strong advocate for getting in early and working on things rather than leaving challenges and difficulties 6 months or a year or longer than that, when typically it becomes harder to get improvement. Now, children, little people. What do we need to keep an eye out for with children? Primary school age children, for example. I'm just going to, there's not enough time here to talk in detail about all of the different ages, but if I just say primary school age children in general and what we can keep an eye out for. Withdrawal, regression, preoccupation, anxiety, and physical changes. They're the 5 main areas that as parents or carers we can keep an eye out for or look out for. Now, what do I mean when I talk about withdrawal or when I mention this word withdrawal? Well, this is children who've lost interest in activities since the storm, or they've lost confidence and self-esteem to do things, or they may be not wanting to talk anymore. You know, they've withdrawn from being involved in life. They seem to have gone inside of themselves. Very important to pick up on this, you know, and as an adult or a parent, the way we pick up on it is by being in tune with the young child's experiences. But what I want to mention and make a link back to is that it's difficult to stay completely in tune with the children in your life if your life is disrupted and you're stressed, because your focus will be elsewhere. A second key change that we can look out for in children is regression. Regression is a term that we use to refer to children taking a few steps back in their development. So classic examples of regression, the young child who becomes much more clingy and attached to their parents. You know, they're scared of sleeping in their own room. They want to be in mum and dad's room or in mum and dad's bed. Or they were absolutely fine in terms of going to the toilet on their own. You know, they'd mastered that, but now they're having challenges again in that area. You know, bedwetting or not making it there in time. These are examples of regressive behaviours. We could have a whole discussion about regression. I want to say, don't be overly concerned about it. In a way, it's also a normal response to a big life event for a young person who's trying to adjust to that and to work through it. But we need to pick up on it so we can support them and help them through. Preoccupation is a third change or reaction response that we can keep an eye out for, and that means, or examples of preoccupation in children, young children, would be needing to relive the storm experience through repetitive play, or drawing about it, or painting pictures of the storm, for example, and or concern about future storm events. Do you think there'll be another storm? When will there be another storm? What did the weatherman say, or the weather lady say? What's the weather forecast? Is there going to be, you know, these sorts of worries and concerns? This represents and fear, of course, about the same sort of event occurring again. And then there's anxiety and physical symptoms, and of course adults and teenagers experience anxiety and physical symptoms as well. So, you know, anxiety in children, what we'll tend to see are changes in concentration and behaviour, sleep problems, eating challenges, a bit more irritable, and separation anxiety. There's some of the things to keep an eye out for. And then there's physical symptoms. So stomach aches, headaches, needing to go to the toilet. So there are 5 key areas. I want to talk to you about strategies though. So what do you do as a parent or an adult to support a little one, you know, a little person that's in your life? Well, I want to sort of state the obvious here and say that we need to remember that young children don't have the collection of life experiences and knowledge and internal thinking and coping abilities that we as adults have. You know, we at least know what a severe weather event is. We, to a certain extent, know what causes it and what can happen. But children in general don't have the same depth or breadth of life experiences that adults have to refer to. So for children, they're often finding themselves experiencing things regularly for the first time. And so that puts them in a totally different place in terms of how they come to terms with a storm event and work through it, or a natural disaster event, or whatever it happens to be. And so fundamentally, and again, bearing in mind this stress response that I've touched on, survival mode, which is no different for children, they have it as well. It's just that theirs is developing. The primary thing that we can always be working to do is to, apart from managing our own stress levels and staying calm, is to help a young person feel safe and connected. Safe in their environment and connected to us. And then in addition to that, what we can do over time is work to help them make sense of what's happened. So how do you do that? Well, you can do this by asking yourself, what's my child's perspective? I need to understand how they're seeing it. How are they seeing the world and the storm experience? And the only way you can do that is by talking to them. And you can adopt an approach of inquisitive questioning, curious talk. You kind of want to get inside of their head and understand how they're seeing things. And then once you do that, you can bring things out into the open and you can try to address their problems. We're better off bringing things out into the open and knowing what's going on than not knowing what's going on and just hoping that everything sorts itself out. So we take their concerns and their fears seriously. We always work to bring about a sense of safety. And if ever there's a problem or their view seems to be wrong and not accurate, then in an age-appropriate way, so by using simple language, talk to them in a way that helps them regain a more healthy and helpful perspective. Yeah, not every windy day represents a storm, for example. Support them to talk. If they start to talk about their storm experience, support them to talk through to the point where they felt safe again. Now, I'd better move on to youth and teenagers briefly. So teenagers respond, as you would imagine, differently to children and different to adults. Of course, they can also have the same sorts of thought, emotion, and physically based reactions. But with teenagers, with youth, well, there's a much stronger tendency to rely on their peer group for support. Plus, we need to bear in mind the COVID impact at the moment as well. Teenagers usually they're sort of spending their lives in packs or in tribes, doing things for the first time, many different sorts of things for the first time, and experiencing many rites of passage, whether that's a school formal, or getting a driver's license, or going to someone's 16th or 18th, those sorts of things. A lot of those events have been disrupted. So there are additional challenges for them in terms of how they draw support from their peer group, and that can have a flow-on effect to their functioning as well. So for adults, again, what we can do is to help teenagers is that we need to understand how they're trying to manage their distress. And again, we do that by talking to them. We can do that. I'll mention a few things in a moment, but there's also another sort of a key suggestion, or I guess a kind of a golden rule I wanted to bring out here, which is to look for changes in behaviour prior to the storm. To look for changes in behaviour, and you do that by looking at either your child or your teenager, how they were prior to the storm and how they are now. And if you see or notice significant changes, then the storm has probably had some sort of impact or effect, possibly with COVID also. So key suggestions for adults, parents, carers who have youth in their lives. The golden rule is to lead by example. Create an environment in which it's understood that talking about the storm event and about what happened is okay, and that it will be supported if they want to do that. Now, some youth, they want to protect their parents. They'll be thinking to themselves, I don't want to talk about it. Mum and Dad already have heaps on their plate. They've got so many things that they need to deal with. I don't want to burden them with additional stresses. And so they'll keep things to themselves. But what you can do is let your children know, let your youth know that, yes, we've got a lot on, but we still really want to know what's going on for you. We've always got time for it. We've always got time for you. Please don't hold back. If there's something on your mind, let's get it out in the open, and let's work through things together. And this can also be the other side, where relationships and connections strengthen between families, and they come out of difficult life events feeling more connected as a result, having learned things about each other. Now, it's not all, of course, smooth sailing. So with youth also, another suggestion is to pick your battles too. To know which sort of issues to challenge or put boundaries around, or with everything else that's going on in life at the moment, which ones to just let slide. And we can definitely be more open to letting things slide at the moment because there is so much general disruption and uncertainty in life. So I'll just finish off with key recovery and wellbeing priorities. that I want to suggest to you. Just ask you, to pick up on 2 or 3 of these and carry them with you after this session. So this applies across the board to everybody, perhaps a little bit more so for adults though, given that they're creating that stable foundation, as I mentioned. So bring your awareness back to yourself and figure out what your health and well-being state is at the moment. Figure out your levels of stress, because if they're high and if the disruption is taking over, it's really important to take some steps now. Make a decision to actively manage your health and well-being. Again, this is much more now, unfortunately, about running a marathon and being prepared to run a marathon. But as people do when they run a marathon, I've been told, they'll keep up their hydration, they'll keep up their nutrition on the way through, and at the end, they'll rest and recover. So this is where what we need to be doing is managing our energy levels for what could be quite some time. So find a speed that will enable you to do that. Don't let the disruption take over life as best as is possible. Use routines, but you can also be flexible. It's not all about rigid routines, especially with kids and teenagers. Sometimes you can just completely let them go, and that's fine for a period of time. Hope and optimism is a perspective that provides people with so much benefit when it comes to severe weather events, natural disasters, trauma, and many other challenging life events. It's a common thread that flows through recovery. So the perspective that we adopt, and I say this cautiously because it's very challenging, but trying to remain optimistic and trying to remind yourself of the possibility of learning things as a result of having this experience that will in fact enhance your life for the long term is important, as is support and staying connected. And then just very gradually, in your own time and in your own way, start to allow yourself to come into contact with this thought or this idea that maybe we're moving our way into a new normal, where things won't be exactly as they were. But I can assure you that the new normal is always a place that is comprised of parts of the old and parts of the new. But in time, the new normal becomes completely normal. We get used to it. And so even though looking at a new normal coming can be quite daunting and challenging, many communities have been through it before, and many people and most people arrive at a point where life is meaningful and enjoyable once again. And we will get there, but obviously there are many challenges ahead with everything that's going on in life. I'll finish up there and we could go to Q&A again.
Thank you, David. We have some really good questions coming up. I just want to remind everyone that we will be going to about midday, but it is being recorded. So happy to stick around and, take more questions. But if you do need to leave, it will be recorded and be posted on the Yarra Ranges Council website. Now, first question. I've seen withdrawal among adults following disasters, not just children. In what ways can others in the community, including strangers, respond to adult withdrawal?
Great question. So let's just recognise that withdrawal is a coping response that some people adopt as a result of going through a really difficult event. Withdrawal is, of course, going sort of more inward than outward. Other people will become stressed and anxious and become involved in lots and lots of activity, a lot of movement and doing things. Withdrawal is the opposite. So what we need to do in order to respond to somebody who has withdrawn is connect with them. And it is only through the connection that we can draw them out. But in saying that, what I want to add to this is you don't have to try to do too much. You don't have to swing into sort of action problem-solving mode and try to sort everything out. There is a technique, in the background that we teach many people, which is called psychological first aid, which is a bit like your physical health first aid equivalent. And the basis of psychological first aid is connecting with people, letting them know that you're there if they need you, just sitting with them and being prepared to listen if they want to talk. And then if they want to explore things in a little bit more detail and are offering for, asking for support or advice, being there to provide that if you can. But if you can't, perhaps be prepared to do a little bit of work in the background to link them with some sort of support service or additional help, formal or informal. So responding to an adult withdrawal, what you would do first is you would just probably say to them that you've noticed a change in them. Is there anything happening for you? Are you okay? What's happening at the moment? And then just being prepared to listen. That's all. That's all you need to do. And then as they talk, you might just say, tell me a little bit more, and tell me a little bit more about what's happened for you, and see where that goes. You don't have to swing into sort of trying to solve people's problems, but that connection just in and of itself often is incredibly valuable.
Thanks, David. Another question, how do I deal with others, even family who do not live near me, who have no idea what I experienced and think it's all in the past now and I should be fine?
Yeah. Another really good question, and this is, I would have to say, one of the most common experiences that severe weather event and natural disaster affected communities go through. Without too much time having passed, it often feels like, and it usually is, that everybody else has moved on. They don't realise or understand, and they've now forgotten. The challenge here is that it really is only the people that went through it and that are going through it that really know what it's like. And so there are two things here. One, I want to say that I want to cautiously suggest that we adjust our expectations of the extent to which others or people who are outside of the experience can actually know and understand what it's like. They probably can't, and that's sometimes a difficult pill to swallow, but it's going to be challenging and difficult, but that is important to realise that. But then secondly, what you can certainly do in conversation and when you talk with people from time to time is to just say a few things that let them know it's actually not all over. And what I find is that most of the time, most relatively good caring people will say something in response to that, like, oh, I'm sorry to hear that, or gee, it's been a long time, or okay, I didn't realise it was still so hard. Most of the time, that's them doing the best that they can to relate to your experience, but we need to remember they actually won't ever know exactly what it's like, so they'll never be able to fully appreciate it unless they're going through it, or unless they've been through it before.
Okay, thanks. And another question, how can I reach out to help my neighbours who lost so much more than I did? I am feeling a bit of survivor guilt because my home is okay.
Yeah. Thank you for that question and bringing it up. So survivor guilt, if I just mention what it is and then ask this question, because survivor guilt is also something that so many community members experience. Interestingly, survivor guilt is an emotional response that people experience because they care for others. Guilt is actually an emotion that we experience when we think we've done something wrong. But of course, it doesn't make sense, does it, to think that I've done something wrong because my house survived? No. So what's occurring here is I'm feeling guilty because I can appreciate, acknowledge, and relate to the suffering and challenges of others. So what I'm saying is survival guilt is an emotional response, but it's important to recognize you've done nothing wrong, simply you're experiencing it because you care for others. In terms of what you can do to assist people, and help and support people, again, it's the general checking in with people and letting them know that they're there. Did you know that the strongest predictor of the success of the community's recovery after a severe weather event or a disaster is the type of connections, the strength of connections and relationships amongst community members themselves. So more connected communities tend to recover better and more quickly. So what you can do is just reach out, connect, let your neighbours know that they're there, And if you have the energy for it and the means for it, again, remembering don't burn yourself out, often offering practical assistance goes down pretty well.
Thank you for that answer. I've got two questions here and they're related, so I'm going to combine them.
Sure.
The first part of the question is it possible for someone to develop a mental health issue like depression or anxiety as a result going through something like a storm? And then the second question from someone else is, how do I know when I should get professional support for my feelings, and how should I do it? I've never been to a psychologist. Do I need a referral?
Okay, two great questions, and I might have to ask you, Catherine, to remind me of the second part. But the first part is, yes, people can certainly develop, unfortunately, a mental health challenge or difficulty after a severe weather event, something like depression or anxiety or a sleep problem or a substance use problem like alcohol. But it is by no means for everybody. It's generally for the the smaller minority. Usually 20% of people or less will develop some sort of mental health difficulty or challenge. Most people won't. Probably the caveat to that, though, is that if you already had, identified mental health challenges and difficulties, then there's a chance that the storm, as well as COVID, has made that a little bit more difficult. The second question, I think, was about how to identify the need. How do I know if I need to go and seek formal health and mental health assistance, and how do I do that? Well, the two main indicators, I can probably give you two main indicators that could act as a trigger to you. The first relates to the intensity, the frequency, and the length of time that changes have been occurring. So changes could be those anxious reactions that we were talking about before, or disturbed sleep, or substance use, or feeling low and flat. If they're still occurring now, and then this is the second part, it really relates to the extent to which they're reducing my ability to live daily life effectively. So I can't perform my job. I'm at 50% of what I was prior to the storm. Or, with the kids, I'm just losing my temper far more easily. And, now that I can see they're a little bit cautious to come near me. So we're really looking at impacts on day-to-day life that are more than just minimal. They're flowing out and having quite an impact. Then in terms of how you reach out and connect, well, usually general practitioners, doctors, they're the port of call generally. So I think, they're the port of call usually. Telehealth appointments are very common at the moment, of course, with lockdown. So you could probably call your local medical practice or clinic, book in an appointment with the GP, talk through the challenges and the difficulties, and the GP will make an assessment with you, a more formal assessment about the need for a referral to someone like a psychologist. They'll talk to you about that and whether that's something you want to do and what the process involves. They'll usually give you options, and then it will become a case, if you agree to that, of being referred to a psychologist or another mental health professional who will then be sent a referral, which will then in turn trigger them to contact you and talk to you about the appointment process, which doesn't have to be long term. I want to stress it could just be that a check-in for 2 or 3 appointments is enough to get things in order and get you back on track in terms of your personal recovery journey.
Thanks for that answer, David. So much has happened over the last 18 months, and of course we had been hoping to run this webinar in person, but due to lockdown we have not been able to. So the question is, in general, are the lockdowns going to make it more difficult and challenging for children who went through the storm to recover?
In many ways, yes, I think. I don't think we can assume that it is a definite, because there are just so many unknowns at the moment. So really what I'm saying is there's no simple answer here. I'd like us all to maintain as much confidence and optimism as we can, but I think we need to maintain a good awareness too that there is a lot of research that has come in over the last 18 months, and in particular over just the last few months, which indicates that children and youth are being significantly affected and impacted by the lockdowns and the disruption to their lives, and that teenagers are the group that seem to be being most negatively impacted. So if there's the COVID and the lockdown overlay, that will probably bring additional challenges to the storm recovery aspect for children and youth. Again, I don't want people to be massively concerned or jump to worst case conclusions or scenarios about that. It just means we need to bear it in mind, and that we need to hold in our minds we're probably going to need to set aside some time, 2, 3, 4 months, perhaps through to the end of the year, to just be really cautious and careful and aware of the importance of supporting the people in our young lives for the duration. Yeah.
Thanks. Really, really useful, especially for people like me who have small children. David, you used the phrase the new normal and suggested that we all start to think about this. What do you mean by this? And can you mention a bit more and how might this help people who experience the storm?
Yeah, absolutely. So the new normal is actually a term. I've seen it appearing in the media actually just over the last couple of days, but it is a term that has been around in the natural disaster recovery area for at least 10 years. So most of us have an awareness of this term, but see it through the natural disaster recovery lens. That high state of stress that I was mentioning that causes us to remain focused on the challenges and the difficulties, it also prevents us from seeing the bigger picture, and it prevents us from looking off into the future, and it reduces our ability to plan for a long-term future. Now, the reason I thought it's important to introduce this term for this webinar is that, again, in the context of the storm or the severe weather event, and also COVID, there is just so much uncertainty ahead. When there's uncertainty, that keeps stress levels up, and that can certainly push us up into a state of anxiety. So if we can start to see that things aren't going to go back to exactly the way they were in the near future, then we actually open the door to adjusting, because we start to accept that things will be different. That's really what the new normal is about. It's about accepting that we're moving to a place where things are going to be different, which is okay. Challenging at times, but okay. Once you do that, you can actually start to live your life in a more meaningful way in the moment and have the more enjoyable experiences rather than being stressed out all the time. And then eventually, as I mentioned, the new normal just becomes normal. We get used to everything. Humans are fantastic at adapting and adjusting. There will be many big adjustments that people out there in life have gone through, and I'm sure they'll be able to look back at specific incidents and think, gee, that was hard, but yeah, that's right. Then I reached a point where it sort of just all became normal again. So the new normal, just being aware of this idea and remembering that the new normal is a place where life is still meaningful, purposeful, but importantly, it's a way of living where we're not focused on what happened in the past, like the storm, and it's generally not a place where we continue to have our day-to-day life being focused on what do I need to do next? What's the next thing on the list? Yeah.
Thanks. Another question from a participant. Anticipating future disasters or pandemics, is there value in teaching the philosophy of Stoicism in schools to prepare kids?
Yes, and there are lots of programs around Stoicism or resilience. There are so many, great question, and we could probably spend a whole day talking about this, but in essence, yes. I certainly want to reassure people out there that many schools are already working on or implementing programs to help build resilience in young children, because there's a great awareness that the frequency of natural disasters is increasing, severe weather events, etc., and another pandemic, but hopefully not. Perhaps 3 terms I could mention to you, though, in general, for any parent or carer out there that they could bear in mind for the young person in their life, or for the teenager or themselves. So I think 3 terms to bear in mind that you can work on with those young people in your life are confidence, the opposite of which is anxiety. So we want to help our young people be confident rather than fearful and scared. Optimism, the opposite of which is pessimism. So we want, young people to learn how to look to the future in a helpful way. And then thirdly, courage, the opposite of which is quite possibly inflexibility. So if we think about those three things and their alternatives, which are not that helpful, and work to do things by what we say to children, leading by example, spending time with them and showing them how you do things in a confident, optimistic way, we will in general help to build children that are more resilient and more stoic and more adapted to some of the things that may be coming further down the track.
Thank you. Thanks so much, David. I think this will be our final question, because I know that we haven't got much more time left. So based on your experiences working with people, what are your top 3 tips for recovery?
Find a speed and a pace for recovery that is right for you. That's all about managing and conserving those energy levels. Manage the disruption and the stress. Don't let it take over. No matter what is on your plate and what you're facing, make sure that you set aside time in your day and in your week to do the good things, the fun stuff, and importantly, to keep up good connections and relationships with people. Don't let those suffer. And then thirdly, adopting that perspective of optimism and hope. Pessimism won't change anything. It'll just make you feel rotten. We might as well take on board optimism and sort of view challenges, and I say this cautiously, as things that we can potentially learn from.
Thank you. Well, I think that wraps up our Q&A session. So I will ask Fiona to come back on to wrap up for the end of this session. Thanks.
Thanks, Catherine. And a big thank you to David. What a wonderful session. I've got a sea of notes here. I think all of us have been affected by what happened in June in different ways, but clearly everything that's playing out with the pandemic. Lots of key messages for me, that piece about give yourself time, time to process, conserve and find ways to replenish energy. Time to nourish. So I think those short walks and the gardening and the just pause for a cup of tea and smell our beautiful fresh air that we live in, and the routines, I think, is a really useful one as well. But that really key messaging at the end that you've just re-emphasised, David, about the strength of connection and relationships. I think just that reminder that such a powerful contributor to well-being and certainly to community recovery. So lots of takeaways for me, and I'm sure everyone on the screen has got the same. Also, a big thank you to Catherine. Beautiful emceeing and leading the Q&A there. And I know Catherine has been certainly was storm affected, like we all were in Yarra Ranges in different ways, but has been so active and focused on helping communities. So wonderful to have her with us today as well. And we do have a wonderful tech team behind the scenes who keep us all moving well. So a thank you to them, and also Jeanette from Council, who's behind the scenes with us today. We will be offering more of these types of sessions, but hoping for something that's a bit more personalised moving forward, where it's smaller sessions, whether it's with David or another psychologist who can actually see you and interact with you directly. And so being optimistic, let's hope they're in person, but certainly we'll make sure they happen regardless of whether it's virtual or in person. So we'll reach out and make sure that you're aware of those and provide the opportunity to anyone who's interested. We'll also be running more of the community information, update, engagement, feedback sessions, like the large ones we did in July. So we'll be running those in September. And again, they'll go ahead either online or in person. So communication will come out about those as well, and a chance to just check in, reassess current priorities and answer questions with other agencies. certainly ongoing opportunities, and Catherine and I and all the other councillors, and certainly through the council 1800 number, always welcome feedback, questions, requests, anything that you are needing to just connect about. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us. And of course, if you are looking for other support, we'll put the details up again, whether it be BRV or Beyond Blue or Lifeline. And we really would encourage you, if you're concerned on any level, please do reach out. There will be a quick poll will pop up on the screen. So just really looking to get some feedback about this session, but also find out what would be of most use for you in your recovery journey. So please do put in your comments and feedback in that. And of course, a very warm and heartfelt thank you to you all from myself, David, Catherine, and everyone at the Yarra Ranges team behind today. Please stay safe and certainly stay connected. Thank you all.